Okay, I'm going to do the official start with the hat on, and we can talk about Pub 101. So, welcome everyone. This is Pub 101 for Authors, reflections on our inaugural series. This is the Open Education Network and OEN Engage. In previous sessions yesterday or today, we shared with you the University of Minnesota land acknowledgement and also some of our local land acknowledgements. We invite you to share yours in the chat if you wish. We also have community norms that you're all probably familiar with, but just in case, they will be shared there in the chat as well. We are recording this session and we'll share the recording and the transcripts and the slides and all the good things with you in the coming weeks. Finally, if you would like to join us on social media, all of our details are on this slide. We're on LinkedIn, Mastodon, Blue Sky, and we hope to see you there. So my name is Karen Lauritsen. I am Senior Director Publishing with the OEN, and I am joined today by 3 Pub 101 committee members representing a wider team. And I'm going to pause for a moment so they can introduce themselves. Amanda, would you like to start us off as the chair?
Sure thing. Hey, everybody. I'm Amanda Larson. I am the Affordable Educational Resources Initiative Program Coordinator at The Ohio State University, and I have been the Pub 101 chair since time immemorial. And I am going to hand it over to Melissa to introduce herself next.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. I am Melissa Chim. I am the Scholarly Communications Librarian at Excelsior University, and I just finished 3 years with the Pub 101 committee. And so I'll pass it to Christine.
Hi, everybody. I am Christine Rickabaugh. I am the Open Education Librarian at the University of Arkansas, and also key shenanigans starter, I guess that would be my role. I've been on Pub 101 for just about a year and a half. And I will pass it back to Karen.
Thanks, everyone. We are at a transitional time with the Pub 101 committee, and so I want to acknowledge the larger group that was instrumental in creating the Pub 101 for Authors experience. And that experience is both represented by a curriculum and an online series of synchronous sessions that we'll talk about a bit more. First, I want to step back and talk more broadly about the publishing vision within the OEN, because Pub 101 does not exist as an island. It is part of a larger effort to support institutions and all of you working at institutions in providing educational resources to students, because we believe it is the institution's responsibility to do so. And in order to support that work, we want to build a publishing capacity together. We do that through community, professional development, and infrastructure. The question that we ask for you is, why should we work in isolation? There is no good reason to do that. Together, we can share our abundance of expertise and experience, helpful hints, sad stories, so you know that you're not alone. We can share our humanity, remind ourselves that we are not machines. We have personal lives. We sometimes miss deadlines. Share ways to take action to, for example, move an open textbook project forward. And all of this contributes to the common good and our vision for that common good and that public space, that we're not just doing this for ourselves or our own interest, but for the interest of others in the community. All of this support, we believe, is critical for sustaining open publishing at our institutions. So because we have these guiding principles guiding us, the process and the product are valuable and reflect those values. So participants ideally come away from Pub 101 with a sense of why publishing is important, how to do it, and where to go for help, as well as the product of Pub 101, which is not just more resources, but a sense of community and purpose, and that we're in this together. So I'm just going to finish previewing today's agenda and then turn it over to the team. So we're going to talk briefly about Pub 101 for Authors, the timeline of how it came to be, the curriculum, what exactly it is, the revisions process, and then share our own reflections and the reflections of participants in the first ever Pub 101 for Authors, which was just offered this past spring. So with that, I'll hand it over to Christine to talk about the timeline.
Hi, everyone. So yeah, we wanted to give you just kind of a timeline of how Pub 101 has evolved over the years. So Pub 101 has really two components. It is a set of facilitated synchronous sessions that complement an asynchronous curriculum. So once a week we meet on Zoom, and then things are recorded and put onto YouTube. But then there's also an asynchronous, openly licensed curriculum on Canvas that students can engage in at their own pace and at their own things. It covers key topics. We highlight templates and resources that just kind of make the whole process a little bit easier and just kind of move things in that direction. And we'll go to the next slide. So our key goals are to identify the key elements, really look at capacity to support OER publishing, select publishing program services, and kind of think about their local context. We really work on project management methods and strategies, communicating with authors, and then practicing compassion and self-care when you're doing professional publishing responsibilities, because you wear a lot of hats all at once, hence the you wear hats. So Pub 101 started in spring of 2019. It was a library publishing forum. It was a pre-conference workshop. And then that summer, they took it and adapted it to become a publishing co-op curriculum. And then in fall of 2019, synchronous sessions launched for the OEN. And then they continued that in spring and fall of 2020. In 2021, they realized they needed a little bit more to spread out some of the work. So they created a charter and formed a committee. In 2021 and 2020 to 2023, they reviewed and revised the curriculum, and then continued to host annual OEN cohorts. In 2024, they started to realize they needed another iteration for new author audiences. So they kind of started to gather that input and think about what that would look like. And then we spent 2025 really revising the curriculum to make it Pub 101 for authors. This past spring, we had our first cohort of Pub 101 for authors. And also, kind of early spring, late summer, the UK and Ireland adaptation of Pub 101 began. So, and I will pass it off to, I think, Melissa.
I think it's back to me and then Melissa.
Okay.
So Pub 101 for authors, just to dig in a little bit more about why we wanted to offer it and how you might be able to leverage it in your publishing program. We were thinking a lot about potential authors who may not have local publishing support. They learn about open textbooks, they think it's a good idea, they want to write their own, and they don't know where to turn. Ideally, they could participate in Pub 101 and have a foundation, a baseline from which they could potentially work with someone on their campus or even work alone if they don't have that kind of support on their campus. For our members, or for those of you who are offering publishing support at your institution, we also thought that Pub 101 for authors could be a building block for you, and that you could use it as a way to share or shoulder the load of sort of that fundamental layer of program building. We cover a lot of the basics, for example, about writing an open textbook. We cover copyright, Creative Commons licenses, things to think about, how to consider accessibility from the beginning, things like that, that maybe we could cover for you. And then you can think about the specific local services that you're able to offer within your context. We're very mindful not to assume anything or tell authors to, hey, go to your librarian and get copy editing services, for example. We would not suggest that because you may not be in a position to offer copyright or copy editing services, rather. So these are kind of the two key reasons why we developed Pub 101 for authors. Now, to look at our goals, I believe that this might be Melissa, but I can also keep talking if it's not Melissa.
I'm looking at our notes, and I think you have 2 or 3 more slides left before I jump in.
Okay, I will cover the goals. Happy to do it. So the goals for Pub 101 for authors are to offer an introduction to writing and publishing an open textbook, share practical resources and recommendations, provide a broad publishing foundation that is platform and tool agnostic. So we're not telling anyone use Pressbooks or this is how you structure your book in Manifold. We're just giving people information they can use within any tool. And we talk a lot about institutional context, connection, and self-care. That's really important to our group and something that has resonated through the years. In terms of units in the curriculum, the first unit is what is an open textbook? That's where we touch on accessibility. We touch on some of those pedagogical elements that make a textbook a textbook. We offer ways for people to start thinking and planning about their open textbook and what they want to cover, and specifically who their audience is and how they can think about and reach their audience in meaningful ways. Then we support them in developing an open textbook, giving them tools and methodologies for structuring that work. And then there's also a new unit on the role of AI in all of this work. So that's a very brief overview of the Canvas curriculum. It's published openly. It's available to anyone, anytime. And it's the inspiration for our synchronous sessions, which don't teach exactly to the content in these units, but rather teach to them thematically. So for example, planning your open textbook, maybe your author wants to collaborate with other people. We would give them the tool to have a memorandum of understanding that defines, as collaborators, who's doing what. And somebody would speak to how they've used that MOU or how maybe they didn't use that MOU and wish they had. That's the tenor or the style of the synchronous sessions.
Okay, I could hop in now and talk a little bit about the 8 sessions themselves. So the first one is getting situated. This is the first introductory module, getting everyone kind of prepped and primed for the rest of the week, the rest of the weeks to come. Second, we talk a lot about audience scope and structure. Next off, we talk a lot about accessibility, which, especially with all of the changes coming up, is a really big concern for a lot of authors and publishers right now. Then we go into fun stuff with copyright, Creative Commons, and fair use. We also have a unit just on project management and following that, working in teams, which is pretty related. Our 7th one is pedagogical and AI considerations. That's our newest one. And of course, we know that this one will probably be changing and evolving each year. What we taught this year will probably be out of date, maybe by next year. And then to top everything off, at the very end, we have a session called Published Now What? So this talks a lot about how authors can get analytics for their work, see how many views, also doing outreach for students, advertising, and all of those things. So next off, here is a bit about our session goals. First off is complement the curriculum. We have that asynchronous session in Canvas. We also feature OEM presenters to highlight our shared abundance. We build a community and a sense of shared humanity. And then coming back to self-care, which is really important, we had to remind folks to engage in self-care. That is something that I know I need to be reminded of. So I appreciate that that was built into. So our session outcomes, first off, it's identify key elements of an open textbook. This is great, especially for beginners. Reflect on your capacity to write an open textbook. That goes back to self-care. Identify support that may be available at your institution. In terms of project management, apply those methods and strategies for getting the work done. And going back to the human element, consider the actual human elements and the labor that goes into actually writing, publishing, and reading a book. And finally, identify vetted resources that can support your open textbook project. Here is a brief blurb that we got from a Pub101 for authors participant. They wrote, very eager to learn all of the things in the upcoming sessions. I'm moving from that sounds interesting but impossible through, this might be interesting to try someday, to I think I can do this. So you can see there's actually growth. There is a lot of growth through the spectrum. And finally, we will kind of reflect on the OEN guiding principles. Since the inception, there's been a theme of self-care that runs throughout the sessions, reflecting our shared humanity. We also emphasize anticipating what issues may crop up so that folks can get ahead of them and reflecting on a community of action. And finally, a veritable bounty of real-world experience, resources, and tips and tricks reflecting our shared abundance. And now I will pass it on to Amanda.
Awesome. Let's talk about revising the curriculum. So the first thing up is we did a lot, and I mean a lot of community feedback gathering. So we started with getting feedback from Pub101 committee members. They all took a deep dive into the curriculum and came back with feedback about each of the units. Then at the Library Publishing Forum in 2024, we requested more community feedback in a session there where we gathered information with a series of questions in a Padlet. And then we came back and we did that at both an OEN tea time and OEN Engage. So we gathered all of this feedback from the community to see what people really needed these sessions to reflect and how they could help. Then we took that feedback and I spent a lot of time synthesizing it and I brought it back to the committee so that we could all look at it together. And then we divided up the sections of the curriculum between teams of 2 committee members to do the actual revisions for an author's audience. And then we had a really fun peer review session of each section at a committee meeting. And then after everything was implemented, we published the new curriculum, Pub101 for authors. So how did we integrate that feedback? We created facilitated sessions that mapped to the largest concerns of the community, which are accessibility is always a huge one, copyright and licensing, working in teams, project management, and then pedagogical and AI considerations. AI came up in every single iteration of the feedback collection that we did. Then we had to identify and meet with the facilitators who would come and lead those synchronous sessions. We wanted to really prep with them and review the learning objectives and reflective questions that we had already designed as a committee to make sure that they were still accurate to sort of the tone that they were setting in whatever they would be presenting. And then finally, we confirmed that we had appropriately integrated that community feedback into the actual standalone curriculum as well. I'm going to hand it back over to Melissa to kick us off for reflections.
Oh, thank you. So after doing all of that work of actually gathering the feedback, now we can actually sit back and reflect a little bit on it. So what we asked was, did the presenter cover what you expected them to cover? We asked whether the session was helpful and engaging, whether the session was appropriate for beginners, and then finally, what suggestions do you have for future iterations? And here's what we received. We received 39 total responses from the 8 sessions. So on a scale with the question, did the presenter cover what you expected them to cover? People rated a 4.5 out of 5. This for where the session was helpful and engaging, 4.6. Same with this session was appropriate for beginners. And then what suggestions you have for future iterations? We did have this blurb from a participant. This wasn't exactly what they expected. I was thinking that would be more structured, hierarchical, step-by-step, that sort of thing. But this was actually much better. There are other materials in the course curricula that will handle those nitty-gritty details. This, on the other hand, was very impressive and encouraging from the trenches, showing how a person faced challenges in defining their audience and how they overcame those challenges. Much more useful than I expected, even though it didn't do what I thought it would. So what you could kind of see from this feedback, too, was how the presenter really recognized that human element to it. So this participant was maybe expecting more of like a standard, here's the information, whereas actually the presenter ended up sharing that information in kind of a case study perspective. And so it wasn't what this participant was looking for, but it turns out to be what they actually needed in the end. And here is another bit of feedback from a participant. This was very well done. I don't have any concrete suggestions for improvements, but I'll say that I thought I knew a lot about accessibility already, but learned a great deal, and will be changing some of my own processes to improve accessibility as a result of hearing Dr. Tijerina's talk. And I will pass it on to Amanda for some more reflections.
Yeah, absolutely. And so we also had a participant who said that my answer to did the presenter cover what I expected is really a big no, because I've worked in publishing for years ago and thought I knew everything about copyright, so I wasn't expecting a lot. Instead, I learned a great deal. This was a really great presentation that managed to cover a lot of ground very succinctly, despite having to take time for good examples and opportunities for us to have back and forth with her. So in the suggestions for future iterations from the survey, we got resounding feedback they would like the sessions to be longer and that we needed more time for Q&A so that they could engage in conversation with the presenters. Somebody said, perhaps a Padlet with resources. I was like, did you look at the curriculum? We have one of those. That's where the resources live. Breakout rooms for us to share with one another, particularly if we are in similar stages of progress. And then also they said more of the same, getting deeper into the particulars of creation. And then someone asked for homework, which was shocking to us. We're like, you want homework? Okay, we'll consider it. And then we each have taken a moment to reflect personally about the process. So for Karen and I, this has been coming for a very long time. Like we've been talking about this iteration for ages. And so for me, it was really great to see all of the hard work and really the intention and care that we took in designing this offering come to fruition when people showed up eager to learn and grow. And we had very consistent participation, which was very exciting. And I'm going to hand it over to Karen.
I will echo that and say that being in a room with authors, which is not something I've had the pleasure of doing lately, I just found myself with open-hearted people interested in learning how to make a useful and well-designed open textbook for their students. And it reminded me again of why community matters so much, and in supporting one another in doing this work.
Yeah, for me, it was an interesting challenge to go back to that novice sort of beginner way of thinking. I had to really slow down and start noticing some of the assumptions that, because I've been in this space for 4 or 5 years, really helped me to slow down. And it also just showed me how far I've come. And I really appreciated that.
One thing for me that I really enjoyed seeing was that there were a lot of people that came every single week. We started to recognize a lot of the faces and a lot of the names that came into Zoom. So I thought that was really great to kind of have like almost like a mini cohort together. And so here is another reflection from a librarian who did the original Pub 101, and then she also encouraged her potential authors at her university to come to Pub 101 also. I know this is a lot of text, so I'll just highlight one part that I think was important that she said. She wrote that I'm often approached by faculty unsure if We Are Publishing is right for their project idea. And Pub 101 is a great opportunity to provide faculty a flexible opportunity to help them decide and consider their options. It's a wonderful complement to our OER services. I am grateful to the OEN for offering this to our faculty free of cost. And finally, we do have another reflection from an author from the University of Idaho. He wrote, I recommend Pub 101 for authors for both new and experienced open librarians and project managers. Even with 8 years of experience as the open education librarian at the University of Idaho, I learned so much from these sessions. I appreciate the opportunity to learn new skills, explore fresh approaches, and the overall feeling of getting up to date on areas I don't have as much time for professional focus on in my day-to-day work. And then I will pass it to Karen to talk about the future.
Yes, thank you everyone for sharing your reflections. As was mentioned briefly, the UK and Ireland have started adapting the Pub 101 curriculum for the librarian audience to be specific to their higher education and geographical context. They got started on that work just a few weeks ago, and I have been able to observe it in a shared document, and they are off to the races. It's really exciting. And one of the things they talked about as we kicked off that work, I was fortunate to be there, was how the guiding principles really provided a good framework for them, and that this is not the type of work they would find themselves typically doing in their roles, and that it was really exciting to be collaborating across institutions in this way. So stay tuned from the UK and Ireland community of practice on how things evolve there. You also may have been at our session yesterday. My colleague Tanya Gross talked about the new certificate in open education pathways. Pub 101 for a librarian audience or a project manager audience, and Pub 101 for authors are going to appear as pathways in our new certificate program. The idea right now is that people will be able to participate side by side with certificate students. So if someone wants to do Pub 101 as it's been done in the past, which is pretty informally, no homework, they will be side by side with someone in the certificate program who is doing homework and is in a more formal experience. And then I'll also add, you may have seen in the feedback just now, people said it'd be nice to have breakout rooms or nice to talk to people who are at similar stages with their projects. And I just met with our publishing advisory group earlier this week, and we'll be meeting with Pub 101 committee to talk about a publishing community of practice. I think this is probably the next evolution or stage of tea time, if you will, kind of going back to the tea time roots, which is something a little more unstructured, something where people can come and have a place to talk about their projects and get help if they need them. They need it. So all of those things are in the works and coming, I think, down the pipeline pretty quickly. Look for the Pub 101 for authors / Open Ed pathway in January. So thanks to the Pub 101 committee, all of you who offered feedback along the way. We thought it was important to let you know that your feedback was heard and incorporated into the curriculum and into the synchronous sessions. We very much appreciate and value what you have shared with us. And of course, the door is always open. If you have participated or used the curriculum and you would like to share feedback, please let us know. And with that, I will see if there are any questions or anything anyone else would like to share in the chat. Thank you. Is there anything here that we should turn our attention to? Well, it looks like there was an accessibility conversation and other conversations related to future sessions. So thank you for that feedback. As I said, our door is always open. The session has been recorded and transcripts and slides will be shared in the coming weeks. Heather, it's great to see you here. Heather was previously on the Pub 101 committee, and so these are truly building blocks, layers of work that people in our community are building upon year after year. So thanks to everyone who has participated in lots of different ways, and hope to see you with your sunblock, your hat, anything else you may need to show us something beautiful in our closing session, which is coming up next. Farewell.